Hello, everyone, and welcome back to week 4 of our ELC on language immersion in the classroom, shifting the paradigm of teaching world languages. Before we get into that, I just want to thank everybody for their active participation in the group. And I can tell you that it's been a lot of fun going through and reading your discussions, not only in your original posts, but also your comments to each other. So please keep up the good work with that, and let's make sure that we finish strong for the remaining weeks of our ELC. Now, I don't know about you, but when I talk with other people about the work that I do at NCVPS, I'm usually met with some surprised reactions. Not only do they think it must be extremely challenging to teach languages like Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, and Japanese to students, but it's even more challenging perhaps to them because we're doing it in an online format. And that's one of the reasons why we have world language coaching, is because we want to make sure that we're giving students plenty of time to speak with us and also hear the target language. So one of the things we'll be talking about is how the paradigm of teaching world language has shifted over the past really 20 years or so, even from the time when I was in high school, compared to what it is now when there's more emphasis on immersion and essentially giving students as much input in that target language as possible and encouraging them to output as much as they possibly can in the target language. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the timelines to proficiency. During the mid-80s, ACTFL, or the American Council of Teaching Foreign Languages, did a study on how long it takes people to reach different levels of proficiency based on their experience with the language. So the study had learners of a language go in and complete full-time intensive and/or immersion proficiency-based language training under the supervision of an instructor and 1 to 4 students per class. So basically they found out that the students that are in what are considered group 1 languages, like Afrikaans, Dutch, French, Spanish, maybe some of the more common or maybe even uncommon languages to be taught in a high school, fall into this group 1 category. And as you can see here, after about 8 weeks of training, someone with what is considered average aptitude, I'm sorry, I don't know what exactly that consists of, but would reach the level of about an intermediate mid speaker. If we go on and take a look at 16 weeks, that same average student would move to the advanced low category. And then with 24 weeks, or a total of 720 hours, so this would be considering, like I said, a full-time program, they would then move into the advanced high category. So they would be pretty capable of getting through a lot of everyday situations that they would encounter and likely able to easily handle things with even a complication. Next, let's take a look at the group 2 languages. So these include languages like Bulgarian, German, Indonesian, and Greek, for example. They found that with the 16 weeks of training, that someone studying these languages with an average aptitude would reach somewhere around the intermediate mid or high mark. It would take a full 24 weeks or 720 hours to reach the advanced low, perhaps even advanced mid tier, and a full 44 weeks or 1,320 hours to reach the advanced high superior, where they're able to get along and have maybe near native proficiency, but maybe not quite there. Now let's take a look at our group 3 languages. These are even more challenging languages for English speakers and include languages like Hebrew, Hungarian, and our Russian. So if we look here, after 16 weeks or 480 hours of training, our student would only reach intermediate low to mid proficiency. So this is a little less than what you think about with the group 1, where the students are able to do a bit more in about the same amount of time. There's an even wider gap if we look at the 720-hour mark. They would hit the advanced low, but definitely not the advanced mid. It would take the full 1,320 hours for students to reach the category of advanced high, but again, they would not be in that superior range. So it's considerably more time and effort for a native English speaker to excel in a language like Russian, especially in comparison with a language like Spanish, which is considered group 1. Now let's take a look at the group 4 languages, and these include most of our world languages that are considered critical languages, including Arabic, Mandarin Chinese, as well as Japanese. It takes the language a full 480 hours or 16 weeks just to reach the intermediate low mark of proficiency. So a student needs to spend a considerable more amount of time just to move up the ranks. In fact, some students with minimal aptitude would only reach about the novice high level, even with this much study. To go on and reach intermediate high, it could take a student around 720 hours at minimum to reach this type of a level. Moving on to advanced low, that would take a full 44 weeks or 1,320 hours in order to reach that higher advanced low level. And then finally, for a superior, not even a distinguished, but a superior rating, it could take around 80 to 92 weeks, or from 2,400 to 2,760 hours of instruction to reach that level. So what does this mean for our students? Well, if we look at the minimum amount of study time that's posted in this chart, 480 hours, the student can reach the level of intermediate low at that point. If we compare this to the group 1 languages, such as Spanish, French, Danish, for example, at that same amount of study time, 480 hours, that same average aptitude student would be around the advanced low level. So our students need to invest a significant more amount of time and effort in order to move up the levels of proficiency. Even a student taking Russian that's invested 480 hours into their studies would only reach about the intermediate low, perhaps maybe even the intermediate mid level of proficiency for that same amount of study time. So our students need the extra time and the extra coaching essentially in order to reach those higher levels of proficiency. And that's why NCVPS has critical language coaches for the students to work with that are taking the more challenging languages such as Russian, Arabic, Mandarin, and Japanese. If you studied a language during your K-12 school experience, I invite you to think back and remember what types of methodologies were used in those classes. Now, I was in high school during the late 90s, and we used pretty different methodologies, especially for the beginning levels of language. For example, whenever I took my French class, a lot of it was geared a little bit more toward doing drills, memorizing vocabulary lists, and most of the instruction was done in English. While there were some opportunities for students to use a little bit of the target language in practice, it definitely didn't happen very often during the class. And while it might have been a daily thing, we didn't really spend that much time on it. Maybe on average about 10 to 15 minutes per 45-minute class period. As a result, most of the people who had instruction like this in their high school days definitely would say that they can't use the language that they learned in high school in order to help them get around and survive through real-world situations. So that was where the paradigm of teaching world language has shifted. Now it's more common to use immersion-style methodologies that are going to be more likely to serve students and help them out in real-world situations. When I was in high school during the late 90s, the paradigm only just began to shift, where teachers were moving away from the older methodologies of drills and practice and moving into the immersion style teaching of language. So I wanted to talk with somebody who only had the older methodologies and that would be able to share their experience and what they remember from those types of classes. Luckily for me, my mom, pictured here, took 4 years of Latin at her Catholic high school during the mid-1960s. And she remembers having a lot of basic drills, using vocabulary lists, and using those older methodologies. However, I wanted to talk to her about her experiences and what she actually remembered to see if that was in line with what other people were saying. So her reflections were, we spent a lot of time doing drills related to vocabulary and conjugating verbs. I remember frequently used commands like stand up, sit down, and the prayers and hymns that were frequently said and sung during Mass. I do remember I came, I saw, I conquered, but I think I remember it because I saw it written on a beach towel. So what stuck and what didn't? Here were some things that were forgotten. Mom remembers spending a lot of time doing drills, but does not remember the content of those drills. So in large, the drills probably weren't all that effective. Mom also doesn't remember much of the vocabulary she learned in school. but she did remember the pop culture phrase she saw written on the beach towel. Things that were taught using the old school methods generally were the things that were forgotten. So here are some things that she did remember. The frequently used commands, things like stand up, sit down, please read, please write, please say, etc. Things that were used frequently and on a daily basis, she was able to remember those things. She also remembered the prayers that were recited by the students and the hymns that were sung during Mass. So the language that students output is what's most likely to be remembered. If the students are actually using the language and creating their own output, they're more likely to remember it. Mom also remembered the things that the students were constantly exposed to. So using the more modern techniques like immersion and leveraging student-based output, we're able to be more successful as language teachers and have the students actually remembering and then ultimately using the language that they're learning with us. So from this information, we can derive a few best practices for coaching. Remember to use the target language with students as much as possible to increase their exposure. Simple directions, basic commands, encouraging words of praise are all good places to start. Model the language for students while encouraging them to speak, and allow the students to speak the target language with you and each other as much as possible. It's also a good idea to have the students ask the questions as well as having the students answer them whenever possible. It's also extremely important that we're using the target language with the level 1 students as well as the level 5 students and beyond. So a good analogy I like to think of is when I first got my puppy Shelby. Dogs don't speak human languages at all, so we use simple commands in order to communicate with them. So when I got Shelby, she didn't have any type of training and she was only 8 weeks old. So to make it easy and simple for her, because she couldn't understand me, I used really simple and basic commands. I was extremely consistent and extremely repetitive. Over time, she was able to learn those commands and know what was expected of her when I said the command sit. Our human students are far more capable of understanding basic commands, so we can use these in the level 1 classes. With a little bit of training, the level 1 students will understand these commands and prompts and respond to them. So it's best to keep it simple and basic with level 1, but also be consistent so they know what to expect. The more we use the target language with all of our students, the more likely they are to remember, retain, and eventually use the language that we're teaching them. I want to leave all of you with this great quote that I love from Ben Franklin. Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I may remember. Involve me and I learn. So the more we can involve students, speak the target language with them, and encourage them to create their own output in the target language, the more likely they'll be to remember and use what we're teaching them. Any questions, comments, and/or feedback, please don't hesitate to send those along to me. My address again is sarah.booten@ncpublicschools.gov. Thank you very much for participating, and I look forward to reading your thoughts and reflections in the Week 4 ELC document. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next week.